You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Julia Kim, and these are the headlines on the continent. The new coronavirus arrives in Sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria reports its first confirmed case in Lagos, its economic hub and home to 20 million people. Cameroon's longtime president Paul Biya retains his grip on power, his party winning an absolute majority in parliamentary elections. And supporters of the Congolese opposition leader are banned from protesting his election defeat from last Saturday. Incumbent President Faure Gnassingbé winning a fourth term with over two-thirds of the votes. But first, Sub-Saharan Africa has its first confirmed case of the new coronavirus. COVID-19 has arrived in the Nigerian city of Lagos, the continent's most populous city with over 20 million inhabitants. The country's health minister announced that the infected person is an Italian man. He'd flown into Lagos earlier this week from Milan, which is at the heart of Europe's largest outbreak. It's the third country on the continent to be affected after isolated cases in Egypt and Algeria. Maud Julien tells us more.
Yaba Mainland Hospital, where Nigeria's first case of coronavirus is being treated. The 44-year-old Italian patient, who lives and works in Nigeria, returned from a trip to Milan on Tuesday and was quickly diagnosed with the disease.
The patient is clinically stable with no serious symptoms and is being managed at the Infectious Disease Hospital in Yaba, Lagos. We have started working to identify all the contacts of the patient since he entered Nigeria, and even those who were with him on the aircraft.
The country's health authorities seem keen to reassure the public, as many were flocking to pharmacies on Friday to buy masks and hand sanitizer. Lagos is one of the most populated cities in the world. It's viewed as particularly vulnerable to the spread of the disease.
I've told my wife before leaving the house today, she's going to get these nose masks so that we can start using it.
I'm very scared about Nigeria. I'm very, very scared. And I just hope that the government will act very, very fast and prompt about this and make sure that the citizens are safe.
The country's health system is known to have its weaknesses, but its response to the Ebola epidemic in 2014 was praised by the World Health Organization. Only 7 died out of the 19 that were infected. The country already has isolation wards and trained personnel. The governor of Lagos says the state has the capacity to treat nearly 80 people.
Well, meanwhile, Kenya's High Court has ordered a temporary suspension of all flights from China. It follows an uproar over the government's recent failure to quarantine passengers on board flights from the Chinese mainland. Now, the party of Cameroon's President Paul Biya has retained an absolute majority in parliament after a contentious election. The February 9th vote was overshadowed by threats of violence from separatists in the Anglophone regions. For the past 2.5 years, they've been fighting for independence from the majority Francophone country. Since then, more than 3,000 people have died and at least 700,000 have fled their homes. Cameroon's Constitutional Council has assured that the Anglophone regions will vote at a later date. France 24's Indira Etang has the latest from Yaoundé.
Partial results of the legislative elections in Cameroon were proclaimed early Friday by the Constitutional Council in Yaoundé. Now, the ruling CPDM party, which has been in power since 1982, was able to win 139 out of 180 seats in the lower house of the National Assembly. Earlier this week, the Constitutional Council ruled that elections will be rerun in 11 constituencies in the conflict-hit northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon. The opposition had cited insecurity as one of the major reasons why there was a very low voter turnout in those parts of the country. Joseph Mbandam is a member of parliament for the opposition SDF party. He is satisfied that elections will be rerun in his party's stronghold.
Do you want to imagine that I could have been beaten in my own constituency by 418 votes, a constituency that has tens of thousands of voters, and that they said there was an election and I had 12 votes? That's ridiculous. It's not an election.
The elections governing body in Cameroon, Elecam, has between 20 and 40 days to organize a rerun of elections in the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, which have been at war since October 2016. Insecurity is still a major concern in this part of the country, and it is because of insecurity that people were unable to answer present at polling stations on election day, February the 9th.
That was France 24's Indira Etang reporting to us there from Yaoundé. Let's turn now to Togo, where protesters angry at the results of last Saturday's presidential election have been banned from demonstrating in the capital. Supporters of opposition candidate Agbeyomi Kodjo took to the streets after he cried foul play. According to the Electoral Commission, incumbent President Nasingbe won 72% of the vote in the first round. The widely expected victory extends more than half a century of rule by Nasingbe's family over Togo. France 24's Emmanuel Landé has the latest.
Supporters of opposition candidate Agbeyomi Kodjo were banned from demonstrating in public in the Togolese capital. All access roads to the rallying point were blocked by the police force earlier in the day. Officially, the demonstration was banned because it wasn't cleared with the Togolese authorities. Despite the ban, some demonstrators still tried to regroup and protested through song, condemning the results of the presidential election, which saw Faure Nasingbe win a fourth term in office, according to results announced by the National Electoral Commission. Protesters led police on a game of cat and mouse, splitting up and moving throughout the city. One activist, hit by a tear gas projectile, was taken to hospital. However, the main leaders of the protest were unable to attend the demonstration they had organised this Friday. The area surrounding the homes of the opposition candidate, Agbeyomi Kodjo, and his main supporter, the former Archbishop of Lomé, Monseigneur Podro, had been cordoned off in the morning.
The African Union says it's recalling its team of election observers for this Sunday's constitutional referendum. Its decision follows that of ECOWAS, which decided also not to send its observers because of potential danger. Now, Guinea will be voting on whether to extend President Alpha Conde's rule for at least another decade. The constitutional referendum has sparked months of at times violent protests as fears grow that Conde plans to use the reform to seek a third term. Since the unrest broke out in October, at least 31 people have been killed. Now, Congolese singer Fally Ipupa has ignited more than just controversy on his latest visit to the French capital. Major fires have erupted outside his concert venue near Paris's Gare de Lyon station after an anti-Fally rally degenerated into violence. Protesters torched over 24 vehicles, forcing the partial evacuation of the train station. An alleged ally of former President Joseph Kabila and of the current regime, the musician is a divisive figure among the Congolese diaspora. Demonstrations protesting his presence had been banned by the police. France 24's James Facina is there for us.
There's still a very heavy firefighter and police presence all around here, around the concert hall. As you can see, plenty of firefighter crews just around, all around me here. The concert is still going ahead, this despite the protests that were going on earlier this afternoon. Now, just behind me is the Gare de Lyon, which was completely, there were flames just around the station. And at that heavy rush hour meant that obviously plenty of people, they had to evacuate parts of the station and close it. What was more impressive was the extremely huge cloud of black smoke all across the neighbourhood, really. Now, the protests don't come as are somewhat expected. The police had banned protesters from coming out. They'd banned these protests, but they've still come out in number. They're accusing, of course, the big star Fally Ipupa from being too close to the government. And it's not the first time, of course, that opponents do come out. They do regularly voice their opposition towards the government of the RDC here in Paris, but something of this scale is definitely much less unheard of.
And finally, stories about Africans by Africans to couch potatoes around the world. Online streaming giant Netflix has released its first Made in Africa production, a spy thriller titled Queen Sono. The new series stars South Africa's leading actress Pearl Thusi and premiered in Johannesburg on Thursday. Shot at more than 37 locations, the show features countries including Kenya, Tanzania, Nigeria and South Africa. Queen Sono is Netflix's first investment on the continent and is part of its broader Made in Africa, Seen by the World strategy.
Very powerful.
Definitely looks like a series worth catching. Well, that's it from me here on Eye on Africa. There's more news coming up. Stay tuned to France 24.
The government of Bangladesh has declared war on yaba, a drug that is ravaging the country, but not by imposing tough prison sentences. According to eyewitnesses, the police have orders to kill on sight and make the executions look like accidental crossfire shootings. The police act with impunity. Over the last year and a half, nearly 1,500 people have been executed without trial. Our reporters went to Bangladesh to talk to police officers and families of the victims of these summary executions.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.